Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a relaxing Sunday. Just thought I'd start out with this guy here, the man who won't be moved, can't be triggered or shaken by anything around him. This guy right here, this is goals, okay? When you're in a situation where you feel like you're getting really worked up, just remember to observe it. Don't get involved in all the drama. Take a deep breath. Think about this guy here. We all need a little more peace in our lives. All right, guys. Well, let me just throw up one more thing because today we're going to be talking about Howard Blum's When the Night Comes Falling, a requiem for the Idaho student murders. And I just thought we could start off with this little gift that I made, an old favorite. We've got Brian sitting there, sort of looking towards Attorney Mazoth. We've got Bill Thompson leaning on his hand, really just not happy in this moment. This was one of my favorite moments in the trial so far, or the pre-trial, should I say. All right, guys. So let's talk about it. The book. When the Night Comes Falling, a requiem for the Idaho student murders by Howard Blum. Now, this guy is getting a lot of flack online. I've seen some other creators review it. And everybody has a right to their opinion, right? I just tend to look at things my own way, like we all do. The way the book is set up, I just wanted to show you. I thought it was interesting. He sets it up as parts. So part one is Michael's story, which is what we're going to go through today. And I have a few things I'm going to add to it because, of course, like many of you, I've just dove way too deeply into this case, okay? So I will add to Michael's story with things that I have found out on my own, but I am going to use his chapter sort of as a guide, I guess the best way to put it. So he has Michael's story, then part two is the children's story, and that's where he goes into, you know, the people who were killed that day. The hunter story. And though you may assume, or maybe not, but if you're like me, the hunter you're thinking is the killer, right? That's not who he's talking about. The hunter is actually one of the police officers. And if you know the story about the wolf, you'll know what I'm talking about. But we'll get to that when we get to it. Then he has the forensic scientist story, the defense story, and the last part of the book is Steve's story. And so I like the way he did it. I will say I read the whole book except for the last section, which is Steve's story. But I took a lot of notes while I was reading. And the first thing I'll say is, so far from what I've read, he hasn't actually accused Brian Coburger of being the killer. Now, it's implied, obviously, by his book. But when he describes the scene, you know, of them being killed and how he thinks it went down, which is basically like the PCA shows, right? He doesn't really venture past that. He's not using Brian Coburger's name. Now, obviously, we can assume he's referring to Brian because the whole book, or not the whole book, but a lot of his story is told in here with his father's story. But I just wanted to state that sort of as a point of fact. In the beginning, he kind of lets the readers know. He has a note to the reader. And this is sort of his, it's his way of letting you know where this information came from. And he says throughout the past couple of years since the murder occurred, he has visited Idaho. He's visited Idaho, Washington, Pennsylvania multiple times. He's knocked on many doors. He's taken people to dinner. He's sat in living rooms and had coffee with people. Drank Rolling Rocks at rowdy bars. Although I can't picture this guy in a rowdy bar, but okay, I'm sure he's telling the truth here. And he even discussed some of these things with his law enforcement sources. He's not specifying that these are Idaho law enforcement sources. These are LE sources he's had over the years because he's been doing this type of work for quite a while. He said that most sources want to remain anonymous. I sound like Trooper Paul over here. I'm just using the last syllable of the word. Most sources, surprisingly, right? Oh, I can't believe it. They want to remain anonymous. Okay, fair. But some actually wanted money. He said some people wanted money for what they were going to tell him. And he said, no way. So those people he did not speak to. So he says the way he's able to make this book and write this book is by drawing on public statements coupled with conversations with friends and family of these people, business associates of the people in the book, and social media posts. So Winnie wants to be a part of this. Say hi. There you go, Win. Okay. We're in the middle of a story here, Winnie. This is serious business. Okay, so that's how he gets the information. And actually, at the end of the book, he writes down his sources for the information. So, I mean, you can say he's making all this up and it's a fantasy, et cetera, et cetera. But he is claiming that any information that's in here that maybe you or I weren't aware of, it's from these sources here. So we'll go with it, right? All right. So it's Michael's story. And he starts off letting us know. See here, I'm going to put my first picture up. Michael's story. Where are you, Mr. Coburger? He basically starts off letting us know, his father is waking up on December 10th. And he arrived December 10th to Washington. Okay. So he did fly to Seattle, which many of us might have heard through various sources. But he ended up, Brian apparently didn't drive to Seattle to pick him up. He then took one of those little, we used to call them puddle jumpers when I lived in Hawaii. If you're going to different islands, it's like a little plane. He took one of those to the Pullman Moscow Regional Airport. Okay. So that's where, he landed ultimately in one of those tiny little airports. And that's where Brian went and picked him up on December 10th. So let's see. Let me just show you a picture of Michael Coburger in case you have not seen him, although many of us have. Winnie, stop. Stop. This dog is crazy. Here we go. All right. So here's Michael Coburger here. Okay. Here's another picture of him here. And here's a picture of him that I found when he was a youngin. Okay. I like the way they spelled his middle name, Michael Francais Coburger. All right. So anyway, Michael's story. Michael apparently is very proud of his son. Didn't think he would really amount to a whole lot, given the fact that Michael himself, according to Howard Blum, is a janitor, and Michael Coburger Sr., Brian's grandfather, was also a janitor, apparently. So this was sort of the family's, this was their occupation. And he was proud of his son for getting into Washington State University because he had a sister-in-law who graduated from Washington State University. His sister-in-law was married to his brother Clement. And here is his brother Clement. I have a picture of him. And Clement looks a lot like Brian Coburger, doesn't he? Now, this isn't what he looks like now. This is when he was younger. But it's another picture of him here. That's Clement on the right. I don't know who the other two people are. But yeah, this is Clement Coburger. And apparently one of his wives, because he was married a few times. I think at least 3, maybe even 4. One of his wives apparently graduated from WSU. Okay. And she got a degree in psychology. Right. So let's just go back up here to Michael. So Michael grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And his parents, unfortunately, they divorced. And his mother and his 4 brothers, they ended up going out west to Las Vegas, apparently. But Michael wanted to stay, so he stayed with his father. So here's a picture of his mother. Her name is Kathy Votino. Attractive lady, right? This may be his father, but I can't 100% be certain. It's really hard to find any photos of this man. So this may be his father, Michael Coburger Sr., also known as Brian Coburger's grandfather. So he was married to Kathy Votino. And, they ended up having a total, I believe, of 7 kids. Now, I could be wrong. This is not in Howard Blum's book, but I'm adding some of this on from research that I found when I was looking through his family tree. So Clement was one of his brothers. And then he had twin brothers, in case nobody knew. What do you know? We got more twins in the Idaho case. Love it. These are the twin brothers, Ronald and Randall Coburger. Okay. And then we also have, this is an older picture of the twin brothers, Ronald and Randall. And apparently Ronald was, he was into bodybuilding. So here's a picture of him when he was doing his bodybuilding stuff. And so he had these 2 brothers here. He had Clement, who was the older brother. And sadly, though, and again, this is not in Howard Blum's book, but from evidence that I have found in searching, sadly, he also had 2 siblings that passed away. This is Louis Coburger right here, little brother of his. Now, he didn't pass away until he moved out west to Las Vegas, and I believe it was in a motor vehicle crash that he died. But he was young, sad. Louis Robert Coburger, born on May 20th in Brooklyn. His father, Michael Francis Coburger Sr., and his mother, Henrietta Catherine Kathy Votino. So, yeah, he ended up passing away. And sadly enough, there was another death of a child in their family. And this was a baby. The baby was very young. She was only 4 months old. And so it's just devastating, honestly, with that kind of a loss. So when the baby's name was Deborah Coburger. And I might have a picture of the tombstone here. I'm not sure if I uploaded it. Yes, I did. Here we go. So this is Deborah. Whoops. I got the lawyer in the bottom half here. But this is Deborah Ann. She only lived for 4 months. Very sad. Her father, Michael Coburger Sr., and Kathy Botino. All right. So here's the family here. This is a picture of some of Brian's uncles and aunts and his grandmother. Now, in the center is Kathy Botino. And here's the twin brothers, Randall and Ronald, or Ronald and Randall. Sorry, I don't know which is which. This is Clement right here in the back. And then, his other brother, Lewis. So when they first went out west, it was these three, right? And Lewis, who has since passed away. Now, this woman down here in the lower left, her name is Cheryl. And she is a half sister of Michael Coburger. So she is Brian Coburger's aunt, but she had a different father, because just like Clement, Kathy Botino also married quite a few times. She married 4 different times. So I believe her last name was Smith, and then she got married, and now it's Ebersol. And the woman in the center, I believe, could be Clement's wife. It might be the woman who went to WSU, but I'm not positive. All right. So now that we went through that little family history. Yeah. So his brothers and his mom, they moved out west, but Mr. Coburger, he just didn't want to go out that way. He ended up staying in Brooklyn with his father. And apparently, his father was also arrested. According to Howard Blum, his father stole a car. And so he was a criminal as well at some point in his life. All right. So then let's talk about Brian's sisters. So Brian's sisters, let's see. Well, here's one picture here. So this is a picture I found on Twitter. It's since been deleted. This is a more recent photo. This is taken after Brian was murdered, or after Brian was arrested. Sorry. This is his sister in the front, Melissa, and that's his mother, Marianne. And then there's Mr. Coburger, Michael Coburger. It's his story that we're getting into here. And then he also has another sister, Amanda, who we all have heard about, I believe, because she was in a horror movie when she was younger. And so I believe I have a picture of her up here. Yeah. So this is Amanda, who looks a lot like Brian, honestly. And then this is Melissa. So these are the 2 sisters here. All right. So moving on. Mr. Coburger, he was kind of worried about his son, according to Howard Blum, because he was going out west. It was very far away. He didn't understand why Brian had to go that far away for school. And he thought Brian wanted to be a police officer. He didn't understand why he needed a PhD for that. So although he was very proud of his son, he was also sort of concerned. And that concern came from Brian's childhood. Apparently, he goes into this a little bit. Howard Blum does take some excerpts from the visual snow board that we saw, where he talks about how he doesn't feel like anything inside, and he's just like a numb person. He doesn't know what's wrong with him. And he talks about how Brian got into some trouble. Unfortunately, the area that they lived in Monroe County in Pennsylvania, there was a lot of drugs. And, that was the time when Oxy was just kind of blowing up. And there was a lot of heroin use. And apparently a couple houses down from where Brian grew up, a friend, according to Howard Blum, last name Sabo, I think, was the one who sort of introduced Brian to opiates and then heroin. I believe that that gentleman did die. I remember reading about that. It was one of his friends, unfortunately died from an overdose. And then Brian ended up hanging out with another young woman named Ashley Flugel. And he introduced, apparently, according to Howard Blum, he introduced her, got her into the heroin. And unfortunately for her, she ended up getting arrested. She got arrested for possession with intent to distribute, which I found interesting. Brian didn't have that on in his background, but he was hanging out with someone who apparently he introduced to this, who ended up becoming arrested for intent to distribute. So that's kind of interesting. But sadly, she also died from a heroin overdose. So he had two good friends who died from heroin overdose. And that's not uncommon, unfortunately, in towns that this stuff is prevalent. Some of you may know people. I know people. I know a lot of people who have died from overdose. So it just, it depends on where you are, but it's really not that uncommon. And it's not easy to lose a good friend. So apparently this was part of the issues Brian had. His parents were not happy. And I guess one time he needed some money, and I know we all heard this story. He stole, and this Howard Blum goes into it, he stole his sister's phone. He took it to the mall and put it in one of those kiosks where I remember seeing one of these. I've never used it. I keep my phones, but you can use them for all kinds of things like a camera and whatever. But he took this phone, he put it into one of those like little vending machines, and it gave him $400. And this was enough for him to go and buy some drugs. But when his sister and his family found out, Dad was like, nope, I had enough. And he turned him over to the police and got him arrested. And honestly, I think that's smart. I'm sorry, but if your kid, this is how it starts. When your child starts stealing from you, whether it's you or your daughter or whatever in the home, that's not going to stop. That was just like his dad, I think, actually did the right thing in that case. You got to nip that in the bud, because otherwise your kid's going to come in and I've just seen it, right? Have you seen it? Have you ever had any friends or relatives or whatever that get into this stuff, and then next thing you know, they're robbing their parents or their grandparents? It's disturbing. It's highly disturbing. And so I don't blame his dad for doing that. But the good news was where Brian went to school, where Brian lived, they had a rehab program. Instead of punishing, they ended up putting him in this rehabilitative type program to help him sort of get past this, addiction that he had. So what happened was he went into that. He had tried a time before to do this, to get clean in 2014, according to Howard Blum, but that only lasted a little while. He came out and then he went back, and that's when he stole his sister's phone. But the second time he got rehabilitated, he just did a massive transformation. And so, he talks a little bit about that. So, we might wonder, I remember wondering, why is his father going all the way out there with him? Like, why is he flying out there? And then why is he going out there to drive back with him from Washington? Like, this is kind of strange. And Howard Blum, according to conversations he had with family members, gives us a little bit of an insight into that. And it's basically Brian's father felt sort of guilty. He felt like maybe he wasn't a good enough dad in his younger years. He felt bad for being kind of extra hard on him. And he also wanted to kind of see what was going on out there, because he knows how Brian can be. According to Howard Blum, he can sometimes switch up his personality. I think they call it code switching, where you're in this group and you're this kind of person. You're in that group, you're another kind of person. A lot of people do this. I've done it. You might have done it. It depends on who you're with. It's not that you're being fake. It's just that depending on the culture that you're in, you'll adjust to fit in. And he just had some concerns, because Brian had some trouble in the past, and he just wanted to make sure his son was okay. And then the guilt, which I think every parent has, honestly. If you're a parent, you have guilt because you just want to be the best parent ever, better than maybe you thought your parents were to you, whatever. And so this is why. And he wanted to spend some time with his son. So honestly, it makes sense to me. That's not as crazy sounding after he gave this explanation. So he did arrive, like we said, December 10th. And he was pretty excited. They had already mapped out their route. But what happened was, according to Blum, the morning they woke up, or once he arrived there, Brian became one of those other people that he sometimes becomes, I guess, where he's like the unflinching authority. He knows best. He knows better than anyone else, and you're not going to win with him. He's apparently one of these type of people. And I think that I said that about him, me personally, I said that about him after I saw his traffic stop. The traffic stop where, he gets pulled over because he's in the middle of the road and there's a red light. And although he's very nice to the woman, the cop, he's not disrespectful in any way. I got that from him. I don't know if you guys did, but I definitely got that. He's one of those people that when he's right, he's right. And he's not gonna stop until you acknowledge that he's right. And that doesn't make him a bad person or a murderer or anything, but it just gives you an insight into the type of person he can be, right? So apparently this is how he was. His father knew that's how he was. And when he got like that, his father just kind of was like, okay, whatever you say. And this is why apparently they decided to go take like a button, he calls it a button hook south through California, and then pick up I-70 across the country rather than doing the previously planned straight drive to Pennsylvania. So somehow, because Brian felt this other way was better, and his father still didn't know why, he just didn't want to argue it with him. Fine. So that's how they ended up going into Colorado first. Loma, Colorado, to be exact, is where they got a snapshot of his license plate. So his father was very worried about the weather because of this, the extra distance, but he said, forget it. I'm not fighting with my son. He is just too obstinate. He is too stubborn and just whatever. It's not worth it. So they ended up going that way. And so the book kind of opens up talking about his father waking up thinking, great, the weather's good. And then Brian handing him his phone and showing him that WSU had just alerted students because there's a SWAT team out. There's some sort of danger. And in the book, Michael feels uneasy because he's already felt sort of uneasy for a while now, and he couldn't quite put his finger on it. And this just made things worse. So we all know Brent Kopacka. This is the official picture that we've seen of him. This is another photo that we've seen of him when he was at a hotel in crisis and the police came. And in the book, he mentions Howard Stern. Oh my gosh, Howard Stern. Howard Blum mentions that Brent Kopacka apparently was known to police. And most recently, before this episode, he was sort of, someone called about him screaming and yelling and arguing with a manhole cover because apparently there was someone underneath the manhole cover yelling at him. So it kind of gives you an idea of maybe Brent Kopacka had some mental health issues, if you're to believe Howard Blum. All right, so we kind of already discussed about how his mother and his four brothers, when the parents split, they went out west to Nevada. He stayed with his father. He had visited Nevada. He just never really liked that section of the country, Northwest area. We're told that he's told relatives that it's spooky out there, that he feels like there's something not right. Of course, we know that in the Northwest, that's where there are a lot of serial killers, right? So I don't know, but that's apparently his father's feeling about this place. I don't know. And we also get some insight into these stops, right? So one of the things that Howard Blum mentions is that when they pull off, they leave his son's Spartan one-room apartment. And I'm going to call I'm going to say that's BS right there, because if I remember correctly, he had 2 bedrooms in that apartment, and one of the bedroom doors was locked. So I don't know why he's calling it a single room apartment, but you guys let me know what you think. I remember there being 2 bedrooms and one of them was locked. Regardless, his father shows him this WSU alert, and that made him concerned. And and then we find out that Brent Kopaka is shot, and apparently he had made some bullets and made their way to they call it the MRAP, which is, I guess, the heavy artillery, heavy artillery. My goodness. La 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 la. I have to try to anyway, so trying to enunciate more clearly. Apparently Kopaka tried to shoot some people up. They had enough, and they went in there and they killed him, right? And if you're like me, you've watched that footage as well on Truth and Transparency and some other channels. You've listened to it. I've listened to it, and none of it really makes any sense, right? It just doesn't. It's not copacetic, okay? But he doesn't get into that. Howard Blum keeps it really simple for us, all right? But he does actually question, why did they kill him? Like, couldn't they have tried this or that beforehand? And apparently Howard Stern, this is terrible. Howard Blum, my Lord. Howard Blum, okay? He says, apparently he tried to get the PALE cert, which is the Palouse Area Law Enforcement certification or commission's report on what happened, because they did a deep dive into that, because it was an officer killing, a veteran. And he said as soon as that came out, 6 months after, it took him 6 months to put together, and as soon as it came out, it's confidential, so we can't read it. Maybe 50 years from now we'll be able to get that, right? But right now ain't gonna happen. So of course, like everything else in this case, it's hidden. All right, so let's see, what else are we going to say here? Oh, and apparently when they were traveling across country, there was a single, what did he call it? A single engine Cessna was following them across country. Now, apparently the FBI was following Brian. They had this lead on Brian, which I think he says it's basically from DNA, from the knife sheath, but they can't confirm it's him. And I think it's also from, let me see, he gives an idea of why, but essentially the FBI has this information that it's Brian Coburger, but they don't want to tell local Moscow police department. So when Brian leaves, they're following him in this plane. But apparently when he went that different route into Colorado, they lost him, and they were really stressed out, because now what if something happens? If it is the killer and he goes off and kills more people, they kind of let things slide, and they were just not, they were like upset. And then they saw the 2 stops by Indiana police, and I guess the feds were like, oh great, like maybe this Indiana police officer, sees this white car that we're asking for, and he's trying to get some idea of what's going on. So they were apparently like losing their minds over all this. But he ends up getting to Pennsylvania. They follow him. And so back to Brian. When he got out of rehab the second time that was ordered by the courts, he had lost like 100 pounds. And Howard Blum says at this time He became very strict vegan, very health conscious. He wanted his stomach to be a 6-pack, so he ended up getting a abdominoplasty and a paniculectomy, which is possible. I mean, I don't know how he would have afforded that, because that's pretty pricey. And one of the other reasons why Brian's father felt guilty is for having claimed bankruptcy a couple times. So, this is something that you would, in order for it to be covered by you can get them covered actually medically. I've helped people do that in the past. If you lose a lot of weight, sometimes you can get it covered medically if it's causing issues, like if you're getting a lot of infections underneath the panicula, which is that big, heavy flap that kind of hangs down when you're obese, or when you've lost a lot of weight and you have extra skin. So I just wonder, maybe it's possible that medically he needed to have that taken care of, and that's how he was able to afford an abdominoplasty. If this is true, okay, we're going to take Howard Blum's word here that it's true. It may not be, but if it's true, I imagine that it was medically necessary, because otherwise a tummy tuck, that's pretty expensive. And he was in high school, so it's not like he was working, and his parents didn't seem like they could afford things. So interesting note, I guess. But I guess after he lost all this weight and he had this surgery and he was very, structured and regimental, he was kind of like snotty to his old friends, always kind of looking down at them and feeling superior to them. He would kind of pick fights with them. And, they just thought he was a jerk off after that. And I mean, this isn't really that hard to follow, right? Like, is it true about Brian? I don't know. This is what Howard Blum says, according to people we've talked to. But I mean, haven't you seen this story in your high school? I have. I mean, the guy who, like, the chubby guy or the overweight guy or the drug addict guy or whatever it is. And you know how cruel people are in school. People just, you're in a group in high school. You're just put in a group and you're there till you graduate. And it doesn't matter if you try to step out of that group, you're still in that group, right? But apparently he transformed himself so much and felt so much better about himself, and looked at his old friends like, they were scum. And I'm not saying that's right, but I mean, I know people like this, I've known people like this. So it's not outlandish to believe that that could happen, right? And the people who are like this, right, the people who transform themselves like that, they tend to be kind of full of themselves. I'm not saying they shouldn't be, but he was also bullied quite a bit and wanted, to date a pretty girl like most young men do. And now that he lost all this weight, apparently, and was looking great and fit, unfortunately, none of the girls wanted to date him. They still thought of him as a creeper. And so he didn't understand that, and it made him sort of angry. And I get that too, right? I get that too. I get the girl's perspective, because we don't care that you lost a lot of weight and stopped doing drugs and you look kind of handsome now, or you look handsome. We don't care, because we remember when you were the creepy guy, the creepy fat guy, and we still see you that way. That's the way high school is. It's really hard to break through those barriers, right? So those were things that bothered him, apparently. And again, kind of makes sense. So Brian's father would talk to his sisters, saying that he's kind of worried about them, worried about him. And particularly his sister, Melissa, who he says is a therapist. This is Melissa. But I'm pretty sure when I did some research, they were both therapists. I understand she's an aspiring actress, but they were both therapists. Okay. So here's some more pictures of his sister, Amanda, the one that was in a horror flick. It's a picture of his sister, Melissa. So looks like she had a goth stage, maybe. So anyway, all right. So back to Michael Blum. Okay, back to Michael Blum's thing here. So apparently, when he got to Brian's place originally in July, he was a little concerned because his son can sometimes have trouble making friends because he can be a little bit of a know-it-all because he's so smart, etc. And so when he saw Christian Martinez, this young man here, he said, hey, like, could you keep an eye out, maybe invite him someplace, yada, yada. And Christian Martinez, being the nice guy he is, said, sure. And that is where we get the whole pool story. The pool story is when they go to the Grove, and you may have heard this already from Howard Blum, but he shows up at the Grove because he's invited there by Christian Martinez. And while he's there, he also runs into this guy whose name is Zachary Cartwright. Zachary Cartwright also has a PhD. I believe it's in food and biology or food science, but it's pretty high level stuff, this guy. But it turns out Zachary is also, he's also a DJ. There's Zachary right here, Zachary at the Emporium. So he was spinning the tunes that day at the Grove. And according to Zachary and some other people, Brian was nice enough. He seemed pretty cool, but he did have that demeanor about him where he was like right in your face, like blah, 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 blah. And, was kind of like a know-it-all, like wanted to talk about his speakers and the sounds and etc. And again, this is similar to what was described in high school. We all know people like this. Does it make him a bad person? Does it make him a killer? No. But, that was kind of, it seems like that's kind of his personality. He's kind of like up in your face, wants to be, he's very intense, maybe doesn't know the rules about, social distancing. And I think that also can sometimes be triggers, or not triggers, but can be part of, it could be part of, if you're on the spectrum, right? Like little neurodivergent, I'm not saying he is. I'm just saying sometimes, you don't realize you're not like really getting that feedback the right way, like not recognizing the signs that the person's done talking to you now. They need to do something else. And, I've been around people like that, and they don't have that awareness about them. And so again, doesn't mean they're bad people. Just that's how they behave. So it sounds kind of like this was the kind of person Brian was. But despite all that, he was very sure of himself, went up and asked two different young ladies for their phone numbers, got both of them. Goes on to say the women never received a call, got some hang-ups, whatever. I doubt that was him hanging up. I think he just wanted to show that he could get the numbers, So we all know about the Grove, the Grove party. And so he gets into that a little bit. I just wanted to show you this, though. I thought it was interesting. So this is Zachary Cartwright, the one that's the DJ there. Okay. And the guy next to him sort of caught my attention. So I went in a little closer, right? I'm like, this guy looks so familiar to me, right? Looks so familiar to me. So I'm like, is it this guy right here? Is it the cowboy? I mean, I don't know. It's just his features, the way they're just, he's a handsome looking guy. The ear looks similar, right? I mean, I just felt like, that's really interesting. Now, no clue if this guy right here hanging out at the Emporium with Zachary Cartwright DJing is in fact this cowboy here. But it would be interesting if he was, right? Would be interesting if he was. Because this guy is definitely some sort of, I think he might be a marshal or a federal agent or something. Remember, we saw him walk out of 1122 and everybody's like, who is this cowboy? So I don't know. Possible, maybe. I don't know. You tell me. You guys let me know what you think. Okay. So anyway, what else happened? Well, he gets into the history of Moscow a little bit, and you guys might know some of this as well. It's kind of interesting. But apparently there's two unsolved murders that have been there for quite a while. Back in 1969, a woman named Janice Foyles, and then in 1979, a woman named Gail I'm gonna have to put my glasses on for this one, guys. Sorry, I don't remember. Gail Sharper. Pretty sad stuff. But apparently, the second woman, Gail, she just sort of like disappeared. I don't even think they found her body, but there was a note left by someone after she disappeared that said, "You have sold out to Satan." So I was like, "Ooh, I don't know what that's about, but that's kind of creepy, right? Uh, and then recently, I guess there was a task force assigned in Moscow, and they were, it was part of like a big city task force, and they started looking into pedophilic activities. And apparently, right off the bat, once the task force was sort of given instructions, dozens of these people got arrested, and there were 2,200 open cases. This is in Moscow, a town that has 25,000 citizens living in it. 2,200 were being investigated, open cases. I mean, what's that, 10%? That's huge. That's huge, right? He gets into the Kirkers. You guys know about the Kirkers? I think I mentioned this on a live stream with 12 Gauge. Christ Church, right? It's Christ Church, also known as the Kirkers. And this name comes from Mother Kirk, which is a reference to apparently the Reformed Church in Scotland. That's what it's called, the Mother Kirk. And so Kirkers are part of Christ Church. And the Kirkers are, you know, they're pretty much right, ultra right wing. Okay, they're very conservative Christians, old school. When they had the mask mandate over the you know, during the COVID era, the Kirkers were like, we're not wearing a mask and we're not getting vaccinated because you can't tell us what to do. And, you know, can you blame them? I mean, you know, I just think that, you know, their attitude is, you know, this is America. I'm a sovereign citizen. I control my own destiny, and you will not be enforcing these policies on me, including wearing a mask that does absolutely nothing. I mean, I think we can all confess at this point that the masks were ridiculous. I want to talk about social experiments. That was a social experiment. But regardless, without getting too deep into political stuff, so the Kirkers had some trouble with the local PD over this. You know, I remember during COVID, some churches weren't even allowed to congregate. That's a really touchy area to get into when you're the government in America, because you can't be trampling on people's religious freedoms. And they started doing some of that. And apparently in Moscow, these people were not having it. They were angry. And there was a little bit of rifts caused, but eventually the Moscow Police Department got in trouble because there were some officers that fabricated evidence in this to arrest these Kirkers, and they also were violating their rights, their Sixth Amendment right, and you know, to protest and to assemble and to worship, et cetera, et cetera. So the Kirkers won that lawsuit. If you don't know about it, you should look into it. But I think a lot of people that follow this case are pretty aware of that. It was called Stickergate because they were putting up little stickers around town that said Communist Moscow, referring to like Russia, because that's how they felt they were being treated. So anyway, this is part of the culture, though, in Moscow. You've got a university town, and we all know, or most of us probably know, that most university towns are liberal. They're very liberal-minded. It's a liberal culture, right? And it's kind of interesting because you've got a little town in Moscow, Idaho. Idaho is more conservative, but in this town, it's going to be more liberal because you've got the university. But you're going to clash. Those cultures are going to clash. On top of it, you have this Christ Church, which also apparently has, like, I think it's a couple thousand members. Interesting correlation to that and the other thing, but regardless. And their leader, Wilson, I'm blanking on his first name, but he's kind of controversial too. If you haven't seen No Quarter November, check it out. You'll get an idea of the type of mindset these people have. Okay. The problem with Christ Church, however, is they've had some allegations. They've had people who have left the church. A lot of women have come out and accused the men of the church of being controlling, physically abusive, and some even claimed rape. Because in the culture of Christ Church, the man is, on top. He runs everything. And if he wants intercourse, he gets intercourse. Now that's their culture, I guess. And some of these women end up becoming abused. They also had one of the leaders at some point in the distant past being arrested for pornography regarding underaged people. So that's pretty sick and unfortunate. So that's part of the culture there, though, Christ Church. It's a big part of the culture. And it's one of the reasons why some people don't think that Anne should ask for a change of venue. Because these people, as part of Christ Church, which is, I think, like a few thousand in a town of 25,000, so it's a fairly large group, they don't like the cops. They don't trust the cops. They know the cops fabricate and plant evidence. And they know that the cops in Moscow also, overstep their bounds. So if you got one of them on the jury for this trial, you wouldn't be in bad shape, right? They also own, the Christ Church is also affiliated or has members in local businesses and 2 of the local real estate agencies. And they really are trying to make Moscow, they call it the home of the readout. I don't know what the readout is, but it's probably some biblical or Christian type term. So let's see what else happened. All right, so let's just jump into this. Sorry, I'm going to take a look at my notes. See, this is my book, Handbook for the Recently Deceased. This, remember Beetlejuice? That's what I keep my notes in for this, though. So there was some stuff, though, that ended up happening. Brian apparently was not getting along well with the people in his graduate program. A lot of the students said, originally, like, he was great. He was a go-getter. He was one of those people that jumped right in, always knew what was going on, was very prepared for class, always raising his hand, discussing things. And it's just funny because I knew someone exactly like this when I was in college, not grade school. And it was just so annoying because he'd be in the front row. And the minute they would ask something, before anybody else could even get a chance, he'd be raising his hand and always talking about when he went to Germany and he speaks German and he knows all the answers and blah, 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 blah. And it's like me and my friend would always just be like, oh my God, this guy is like such a know-it-all, right? Do you ever know one of those people? Well, it sounds like that's what Brian was like. According to Howard Blum and sources he has. Doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't make him a killer. No, I have to say this every time because I know people get very sensitive about this issue. Okay. My mind isn't made up on his guilt or innocence. I am not attached in one way or another because I don't even know him or his family or anyone in this scenario. I'm more interested in what kind of facts we can gather around the case until we can have more facts because they really don't give us much. Regardless, this is kind of what it sounds like Brian was like. And that would have been fine if that's all it was. But apparently, if you go to a PhD program, if you're in a doctorate program, part of being in a doctoral program is you become a teaching assistant. And you're also doing research, right? Because you're writing your doctorate. And as a TA, a teacher assistant, part of what you do is you help the students in the undergraduate class you might even teach one of your own classes. I remember when I was in undergrad, the TAs they were all grad students, they would hand out our tests. They might have study sessions for us. They might even grade some of our tests if it was like a really big class or something. And so, it's part of what you are doing in order to get your stipend to pay for your doctorate program. And so him being a TA was just a normal part of any doctorate program. But apparently he was grading the students very harshly, which happens. Some TAs are harder, some professors are harder. But as a TA, you really have to take into consideration what the other professors say. When you're in a doctorate program, they have you by the cojones. If you're in one now, or if you're considering going into a PhD program, know this: you are stuck until they let you graduate. You have to follow the rules. Even in my own program, my own master's program for PA, you can't really make a lot of noise. You might want to, and trust me, it was hard for me because that's my nature. But if you want to graduate, you better do what you need to do and keep your head down a little, because they have a lot of power, even more so though in a doctoral program. If anybody remembers the story about the young Asian man who kept going back, I think it was UCLA, he kept going back to get his doctorate thesis approved. After the fourth year, normally you're done, right? That's typical. But if they don't like you, they can make it longer. He went back the fifth year. He went back the sixth year. He went back the seventh year. So now he's 7 years into a PhD program. He goes in, and they decide they don't like it. Well, he pulled out a gun and he killed them all. He had a mental snap. He broke. He just totally broke. And so that's why I say, if you want to go into a doctorate program, be prepared for that aspect of it, that you sort of have to follow the rules, of what they're laying down. Now, he apparently was a very hard grader. So the students were complaining, and they went to this man named Professor Snyder, who also has a law degree, been teaching a lot. So he tried to talk to Brian about it, and Brian just kind of blew it off, because I guess that's the way he is. I don't know. So then he had a meeting. I've done this. I remember doing this in grad school, meeting with one of the professors because we're all angry. And he has a meeting. He was sort of just there monitoring it, but Brian was the one to hold it. And all the students came in and they shared their grievances with him. Like, you're grading us too hard. This was right. Why did you say it was wrong? This isn't fair, blah, blah, blah. And apparently Brian didn't really own up to anything. It was just like, okay, yeah, whatever. And that was the end of it. And this Professor Snyder felt like, this isn't good. So he was just kind of keeping an eye on things. But things ended up progressing. Apparently, this Professor Snyder and Brian talked one time about something, and Brian escalated it into more of a discussion. And if he's like me, he might get a little louder if he's a little bit more upset or feels he's really right. And he might have been doing that to Professor Snyder. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're in a PhD program, you don't want to do that, because Professor Snyder is he's probably got tenure, and he probably thinks he's way better than you, even though you think you're better. And you're not going to win with that. Somebody like that, just got to let them have the win and walk away. But it sounds like Brian wasn't that type of person. And so this sort of behavior continued to the point where Professor Snyder wrote to the department head. The department head and him and another person met with Brian several times, to the point where it escalated, and they finally were like, look, this is your last chance. Now, this was sometime in, I think December 6th was when they had the final meeting. They're like, look, this is your last chance. You need to like rein it in. You're not grading, you're grading too harshly. You're a little bit too adamant about your point of view. You have to learn to be a little more respectful of others. The women feel like you're picking on them more than the men. Who knows if this is true? Some people can be sensitive. The way the culture is right now, everybody hates the patriarchy. So I don't know how much weight I give it, but apparently it was this whole thing, right? And so at the end of it, Brian said, fine, I get it, whatever. And they were fine. And that was the end of the semester. And all he had to do was keep his mouth shut for a couple more days or a couple weeks until he goes off for Christmas break. but he couldn't do it. He just could not do it. 2 days later, he railed into, I don't know what I'm saying, but he went after Professor Snyder over something that they talked about in that meeting, and was basically like, look, and he just went off, and because he had been holding it in for so long. Again, shows you that personality that his father avoids when he says he wants to go up through Colorado, even though it's not a straight line. His father knows better. He's just like, I'm not saying nothing. You want to go that way? We'll go that way. I have no idea what you're doing. But you can't do that in a PhD program because they're going to kick you out. You're not going to win there, unfortunately. And so he ended up doing that, and Snyder had it. So apparently went back to the department head, and a letter was sent to him saying that, you've lost your stipend and basically you're kicked out of the program. If you don't have that stipend, you're not working with the professors, you're done. There's really nothing you can do. You can't just stay there and pay for yourself. It's not how grad schools work typically, at least with certain types of degrees. Thing is, apparently Brian never got that letter. I mean, he may know it now, but the letter was mailed, but it wasn't mailed till like December 15th, because it was like December 8th that happened. It took a little while to get it written up and sent out. So he didn't necessarily know he got kicked out, but apparently he did get kicked out, at least according to Howard Blum. So, and I know somebody who got kicked out of a doctoral program for basically the same thing. Very arrogant person. He was the same person who I was complaining about back in undergrad, saying, oh my gosh, would he just shut up? Same person is the one that got kicked out of the doctoral program for psychology. So I know how that stuff works. He lost his stipend, got kicked out. Anyway, I know that because I dated that person. So it's he's a doctor now, if you could believe that, which is hilarious. Oh my God. Regardless, it can happen. And it wasn't great. It wasn't great for Brian. And he was worried about it. He talked to his father about it. But on his way back, he didn't know that he had actually officially been kicked out. So there were some issues there. There were some issues, apparently. And they all kind of go together, from the beginning, what people say about him in high school after he lost the weight. And then, it kind of, you follow it through. And I can even tie that into what I saw at that traffic stop. He wasn't disrespectful, but he wasn't going to be wrong. He had to win. And even to the point where he's like, asked the cop, with that sort of dumb look, like, well, what should I do? If that happens again, like, what am I supposed to do? She's like, just stop. Don't go through the intersection because you're not going to have a chance to get through. Remember, he said, well, I'm from Pennsylvania. We don't really have crosswalks there. And then he goes into this long explanation. This, I think, is a compulsion for some people. They just have to win. They cannot admit that they've done something wrong. And he seems like that type of person. That's just my opinion. Doesn't make him a bad person. So just sort of interesting. But this is sort of Michael's story. Michael's story is a lot about Brian's story. And it's just sort of a way of getting some background on this information. So that's kind of the first part of it. And I just want to show you one other thing here that I don't think I showed yet. It's just kind of interesting. Well, first, here is Brian's mother. Her name is Marianne Reganese. She's also in New York, Brooklyn, New York, I believe. Now, they spell her name different sometimes. It's like this, and sometimes it's just Mary Ann. But here's another picture of her. She was bright. And that's one of the things that Michael says, and Michael's story says, from Howard Blum, that Brian got his intellect from his mother. You can see here that she was the editor of the Monument, which was the school newspaper. I thought it was interesting because the name Kopaka and how sometimes it looks like it says Kopak And if you look at Marianne, if you look at who is sitting, you can see right here, sitting to her left is Dan Kopec, Kopec. Thought that was interesting. Probably means nothing, but so that's her. And she was also voted most dependable in her school. I have that down here somewhere. Where are you? Yeah, she was like most dependable. You could trust her and count on her. Seems like a really smart, nice lady. Here she is. See, here they spell it different, Marianne Reganisi, but you can tell it's the same person. But she was voted most dependable in her high school. Yeah, editor of the student newspaper. Smart lady. And then here is a picture of her more recently, Marianne. And then here's that other picture I showed you guys before, Marianne, Michael, and sister Melissa. So this I found interesting too. This is nothing to do with anything other than just me looking into things. Unfortunately, one of these brothers did pass away. One of Michael's uncles passed away. And this is the twins, right? And here's their gravestone here. You can see it says Ronald Ames and Randall Allen Coburger. And Ronald is the one that passed away. I believe he is this one here. It was the bodybuilder. I don't know what he passed away from. But the interesting part is you've got, born and death date. Over here is Randall. He'll be buried with his twin brother. Born date, nothing. What's going on in the middle here? What's up with the middle? Like, there's no name on it, right? There's no name. So maybe it's just a space holder. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. We have that. Here is a, well, that's so small, you're not going to be able to see it. But this is Michael Coburger Sr. Might have been his draft card. I'm not sure. But on this, it says that he has red hair and blue eyes. So Michael Coburger Sr. had red hair and blue eyes. And Kathy Votino also had blue eyes, which means all of their kids had to have blue eyes, right? Let's see. A couple other things of note that I thought were sort of interesting. Oh, wait, this might be it. This was interesting too. All right, so here is, this young man's name is Brandon Ebersol. And sadly, he died at a young age. Now, this is Cheryl Ebersol. Let me just show you who she is. There's a point of me showing you this, though. This is Cheryl Ebersol. She is Kathy Votino's daughter, but her father is different than these guys and Michael Coburger, okay? She got married to a gentleman with the last name Ebersol. I think his name is Randall Ebersol, just to make things more confusing. But they had a son, and the son was, he did a lot of great things. It looks like he was very fit. Whoops, that's Lewis, sorry. No, that's not it. Brandon, he was like a board, he like worldwide, like weightlifting champion, etc. But sadly, he died. He died at a young age, and I don't know exactly why he died. I think it was something to do with, I don't want to pretend I know. I don't want to disrespect the dead. He passed away. Okay, I don't know what it was from. However, what I found most interesting, and the only reason I'm even showing any of this, okay, is right here. Brandon is survived by his parents, Randall and Cheryl Ebersol. Okay, this is not Randall, the brother. This is a different Randall. Okay, Cheryl, half sister, marries Randall. Randall and Gloria Ebersol, Henrietta Kathy Votino. So that's his mother. Okay, so that's his grandparents and his mother, right? Siblings: Jonathan Ebersol, Matthew Hammock, Christopher Ebersol, and Randall Ebersol III. So this Matthew Hammock is a son from a different marriage. So Cheryl also was married, I think, maybe just twice. All right, so here's the interesting part. And cousins, Renee, Jennifer Sean, Debbie, Amanda. Now that's Amanda Coburger. Jessica, Anthony. I'll show you him in a second. That's one of her brother's sons. Corey, Melissa. That's Melissa Coburger. Another Corey, Robbie, Scotty, Maddie, and Eric. Brian Coburger is not mentioned here. Brian, the name Brian, is not mentioned here at all. His two sisters are, but he's not. And you know that this is referencing to that family because then it says uncles and aunts, Michael and Marianne. That's Brian's parents right there. And his two sisters are up here, Melissa and Amanda, but Brian's not listed. So you got Michael and Marianne, Clement, we already talked about him, Randall and Leah, Ronald. So these are the two brothers, the twin brothers, Rick, Madeline, and Jim, Kathy and Paul, and Rhonda and Tammy, family pets. Okay. And then here, you know, this is the family: grandfather Michael Francis Coburger, uncle Louis Robert Coburger, aunt Debbie Coburger. So Louis is the one that I showed you. He died, unfortunately, at a younger age. This is him. Remember, he died in Nevada. And then Debbie is, sadly, that's the one that died in infancy. Okay. So it's just really strange to me that Brian Coburger is not mentioned here at all. And it's not like this just happened. This happened in 2020. So it's not like, oh, they're not mentioning him because he's in jail. No, he died in the year 2020. So why are they not mentioning Brian Coburger at all? Like, what is the deal with that? That one really stumps me. I don't know if anybody has any ideas on that, but it's strange, right? What else? Okay, so here is a couple other things just because it's weird. Okay, so here is I believe that's his cousin. This is Brian Coburger's cousin, Anthony, and his uncle. I think this is Randall and his aunt Leah. So these are Coburger's aunt and uncle and a cousin, Anthony. And this guy looks very familiar, but I'm not sure why. He just does. And then we have, let's see, a couple other things. Well, here, let me show you this one. So this is just another weird thing that shows up. All right. So here is a post. This was posted by his sister, Amanda Coburger. Okay. I'm not crying. You're crying. R.I.P. Aaron Carter. Backstreet Boys DNA World Tour. Now it's getting a little weird. November 6th, 2022. You might be like, all right, who cares? Whatever, right? If that's all that it was, whatever. She posted this along with it. Backstreet Boys DNA. I don't know. I don't really watch the Backstreet Boys, but maybe their album was about DNA. And if it is about DNA, why is she talking about it? Because DNA is like the key thing in this case. Then, just to make it more strange, his sister. Now, we all remember Backstreet Boys. And then there was that other band, New Kids on the Block, right? And if you've ever, I don't know if you know, but I used to watch a show when I was a kid. It was called Women of Cell Block H. Well, my mom actually watched it, and I would watch it sometimes with her. But Cell Block H, the block is like a, cell block is in a prison. They call it a block, right? So his other sister posted this, but she posted this. I don't have the date on here, but I'm certain that it was after he was arrested because I remember looking at this. I could prove it if you don't believe me, but truthfully, it doesn't matter to me if you believe me or not. I found this, and it was right after he got arrested. So I think it was like December. I think she might have posted this December 30th, the day he got arrested. All right. So check this out. This is other sister now. Okay, what the actual fudge is she doing right there? I mean, I try not to listen to it too long because I feel like I'm starting to get brainwashed or something. I don't know about you guys, but the song, the lights, there's some message I believe she's giving. And if you look, I'll put it up one more time just for a second because I don't want to go into a trance here. At the bottom, it says, "New kid on the block," and there's a winky face. New kid on the block? Is she talking to her brother? I mean, he's in a cell block now. Is he the new kid on the block? It's hard to not think that when she posted this. I didn't save the date on here, but I have it in my records. It was December 30th. So the day he got arrested, new kid on the block. I mean, that's kind of really crazy. And then on top of it, she clearly looks like she's doing some kind of message because she's going like this in the background. And then she shows a card. And I don't know if it's 6 of hearts, 7 of hearts. I don't know. Something really strange. I'll show it one more time just so you guys can see it. It probably means absolutely nothing. But again, it's just one of those weird things in this case. And you can see her name at the top, Melissa Coburger. So, just strange. I don't know what to make of it, honestly. What else? Anything else in here that I wanted to go over? I think I showed you guys pretty much everything. His uncle Clement, he's very much interested in movies. He's a big movie buff. I did find what I believe to be his Instagram. Clement is this one right here who looks a lot like Brian. He doesn't look like that anymore. This is more like what Clement looks like now in the back here. But I did find something that was kind of interesting on him. Let me just see if I can find it here. Maybe I didn't copy it over. But essentially, he has a Facebook page, and he reviews a lot of different movies. He's very interested in movies. And he discusses something about a live action role play type thing, which we did talk about that. I'm not saying this is a LARP or any of that stuff. I'm just saying I found it interesting that his uncle brings that up in his Instagram. Allegedly, because it may not even be his uncle's, but I'm pretty certain I was able to tie it to him. So all this stuff is public knowledge. This is nothing, special in terms of what I found here. It's not like I broke any laws getting this information. This is all open source information that you can find depending on different tools you use. But that's Michael's story. That's the beginning of the book. That's the first chapter. I obviously added a lot more stuff into it because I thought it was interesting and people might be interested in that. So there you have it. All right, guys. Well, let me know what you think. If this was interesting to you, if people like it, I'll do the next one, the children. I have a lot of stuff there that I can add to it that I've collected. And we'll go from there. And let's see here. Let's just do a little, just say goodnight with this thing here. Just jamming out, guys. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for spending a little time over here. And hope you enjoyed it.